Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Blood didn't splatter when the heavy oak doors of the Valerius Manor were kicked open. Instead, the room shattered under the weight of a silence so heavy it felt like a physical blow to the throat. The orchestra, midway through a waltz, strangled their notes into nothingness. 300 guests, the creme de la creme of high society, draped in silk and dripping in diamonds, froze in unison, their champagne flutes arrested halfway to their lips. At the threshold stood a figure that shouldn't exist, a ghost dragged up from the bottom of the river, leaning heavily on a cane of black ebony topped with silver. He was thin, far thinner than the portrait of the young heir that once hung in this very hall, and a strip of white silk was wound tightly around his eyes, blinding him to the terror he had just instigated. "Happy birthday, Father," Lysander Valerius whispered, his voice soft yet carrying through the cavernous room like the tolling of a funeral bell. "I hope I'm not too late for the toast." The glass in Lord Silas Valerius's hand snapped, slicing into his palm. Beside him, Lysander's younger brother, Cassian, the golden child, the usurper, turned the color of ash. They looked at Lysander not as a returned son, but as a stain they had failed to scrub out. "You," Silas hissed, the word trembling with a mixture of rage and genuine fear. "You are dead. We mourn you. We buried an empty casket." "I know," Lysander replied, tapping his cane once against the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "It's quite cold in the family crypt. But I found warmth elsewhere. And I brought him with me." That was when the air in the room changed. It wasn't just a drop in temperature, it was a shift in atmospheric pressure. The candles in the chandeliers flickered violently, and a deep, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards, felt in the marrow of every alpha and beta in the room. From the shadows behind the blind exile emerged a second figure. He was massive, a towering wall of broad muscle encased in a suit of midnight blue velvet. His eyes were the color of molten gold, slitted like a predator's, and his presence leaked a pheromone so potent, so overwhelming, that several waiters dropped their trays. This was no ordinary alpha. This was a biological anomaly, a ruler of rulers, an enigma. Draken Kale, the warlord of the northern syndicates, stepped into the light, placing a heavy, possessive hand on Lysander's shoulder. He looked at the trembling assembly with bored contempt before his gaze locked on Lord Silas. "You threw him away like broken glass," Draken said, his voice a low rumble that sounded like tectonic plates grinding together. "I picked him up, and now, I'm here to collect the debt for every drop of blood he shed in the dark." To understand the carnage that was about to unfold, one must understand the sin. 3 years ago, the Valerius family was the pinnacle of perfection. They dealt in optics, in politics, and in the ruthless maintenance of their bloodline. Lysander was the heir apparent, brilliant, beautiful, and engaged to the daughter of a senator. He was the sun around which their world revolved. Until the accident. A chemical fire in the family's pharmaceutical plant. A hero's attempt to save the workers. An explosion that took Lysander's sight and scarred the delicate skin around his eyes. In any other family, he would have been hailed as a martyr, a hero. In the Valerius household, he became a liability. A blind heir was weak. A scarred face was bad for stocks. The solution was efficient and cruel. Under the guise of medical treatment abroad, Lord Silas had his son sedated, driven to the lawless borders of the outer zones, and dumped in an alleyway with nothing but the clothes on his back. They told society he had died of complications. They held a lavish funeral. They erased him. For 3 weeks, Lysander had crawled through the freezing mud of the outer zones. He had learned what true darkness was. He was beaten for his coat, starved, and left to rot. He had resigned himself to death, curling up behind a dumpster as the winter snow began to bury him. That was when the boots had stopped in front of him. Lysander remembered the smell first: pine, gunpowder, and rain. A heavy coat was draped over him. Strong arms lifted him as if he weighed nothing. "You have the eyes of a dead man," a voice had said then. "But your heart is still beating out a rhythm of revenge." I like that rhythm. Draken Kale, the enigma. A man who controlled the underworld with a brutality that made governments hesitate to intervene. He had taken the broken aristocrat into his fortress, healed his wounds, and retrained him. Now, 3 years later, they stood in the center of the web that had spun Lysander's doom. Security. Cashin screamed, breaking the paralyzed tension. Remove these intruders. Shoot them if you have to. 6 guards, burly alphas hired for their lack of morality, rushed forward, batons and stun guns drawn. Lysander didn't flinch. He didn't even move. He simply tilted his head, listening to the rush of air, the scuff of leather on marble. 3 on the left. 3 on the right, he murmured. Draken moved with a speed that defied his size. It was a blur of violence. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need one. He caught the first guard's baton mid-swing, snapping the man's wrist with a sickening crunch, and hurled him into the second guard. The room erupted into screams as the elites scrambled back, knocking over tables and spilling wine that looked too much like blood. Draken was a whirlwind. He moved like a tiger among sheep. A guard lunged for Lysander, but before he could get within 5 feet, Draken had seized him by the throat, lifting him one-handed off the ground and tossing him effortlessly across the room into the buffet table. Within 20 seconds, the 6 guards were groaning on the floor, broken and unconscious. Draken straightened his cuffs, not a hair out of place, his breathing even. He stepped back to Lysander's side, his hand returning to the small of the smaller man's back. Your staff is poorly trained, Silas, Draken remarked dryly. Lord Silas was trembling, his face a mask of purple rage. Who are you? Do you know who I am? I will have the military on you. I am Draken Kale, the Enigma replied, the name dropping like an anvil. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the secluded elite knew the name. The man who owned the ports. The man who owned the banks. The man who arguably owned the military Silas was threatening to call. And as for who you are, Draken continued, pulling a folded document from his breast pocket. You are a tenant in my house. Silas blinked. What? I bought the debt, Draken explained, his voice sounding almost bored. Your pharmaceutical company has been failing for years. You leveraged this estate, your holdings, even your offshore accounts to cover the losses of the accident that blinded your son. You borrowed from the shell corporations I own. I called in the loans this morning. You defaulted. Draken tossed the papers onto the floor at Silas's feet. Everything you see, the champagne, the chandeliers, the ground you are standing on, belongs to me. And by extension, Draken looked down at Lysander, his expression softening into something terrifyingly adoring. It belongs to him. Lysander stepped forward. The tap, tap, tap of his cane was the only sound in the room. He navigated the debris of the fight with an eerie grace, stopping exactly 3 feet from his father and brother. I don't want the house, Lysander said softly. It smells of lies. Lysander, please, Cashin stammered, his bravado crumbling as he realized his inheritance had just evaporated. We did what we had to do. The investors. The image. You abandoned me to die in the snow because I wasn't pretty anymore, Lysander corrected him, his voice devoid of emotion. You erased me because I was inconvenient. We thought you were strong enough to survive. Silas lied, desperation creeping into his voice. It was a test. A test, Lysander repeated. He reached up and slowly untied the silk knot at the back of his head. The white fabric fell away. The room held its breath. His eyes were milky white, unseeing, but the scars that had once been raw were now faded, silvery lines that traced down his cheekbones like lightning bolts. Far from ugly, they gave him an ethereal, dangerous beauty. He looked like a fallen angel who had crawled back out of the pit. I passed the test, father, Lysander said. But you failed yours. What do you want? Silas whispered, looking at the hulking form of the Enigma standing guard behind his son. Money? Power? Take it. Just call off your dog. A low growl ripped from Draken's chest, a sound so primal that Silas instinctively bared his neck in submission. He is not a dog, Lysander said sharply, his hand shooting out to grip Draken's forearm, calming the beast. He is my eyes. He is my hands. He is the judgment you thought you could escape. Lysander turned to the crowd, his blind gaze sweeping over them. Get out. All of you. This party is over. If you remain on this property in 10 minutes, you will be trespassing on Kale Syndicate territory. And my partner, he paused, a small, cold smile touching his lips, is very territorial. The exodus was immediate. Dignity was forgotten as dukes and duchesses scrambled for the exits, tripping over their gowns to escape the suffocating aura of the Enigma. In minutes, the grand hall was empty, save for the Valerius men and the two intruders. Now, Lysander said, turning back to his family, we discussed the terms of your surrender. I will not surrender to a cripple and a thug, Cashin shouted. He grabbed a steak knife from a nearby table and lunged. It was a foolish, desperate move. Draken didn't move to intercept him. He didn't have to. Lysander heard the shift in fabric, the intake of breath, the scuff of the shoe. He didn't need eyes to see the clumsy trajectory of his brother's anger. He sidestepped with fluid grace, hooking his cane around Cashin's ankle. As Cashin stumbled, Lysander drove the silver handle of the cane into his brother's solar plexus. Cashin collapsed, wheezing, the knife skittering away. Lysander placed the tip of his cane on Cashin's chest, applying just enough pressure to make it hard to breathe. I learned to fight in the dark, Cashin, Lysander said coldly. Where I've been, you wouldn't last an hour. You rely on your eyes to tell you where the threat is. I feel the threat before it even moves. Draken watched, his arms crossed, a look of profound pride on his face. He stepped forward, looming over the defeated family. Why? Silas wept, falling to his knees as he looked at his ruined legacy. Why wait 3 years? If you had this power, why not strike sooner? Draken answered, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than his shout. Because Lysander asked me to wait. He wanted you to feel safe. He wanted you to build your hope up, to plan this wedding, to leverage everything you had for this one night of triumph. He wanted to watch you climb to the highest peak. Draken leaned down, his gold eyes burning into Silas's soul. So he could enjoy the sound you make when you hit the bottom. And there is one more thing, Lysander added. The Enigma bond. Silas went pale. No. Yes, Lysander confirmed. Draken didn't just save me. He claimed me. And an Enigma's claim overrides all previous family ties. By the laws of our biology, and now by the laws of your finance, I am no longer a Valerius. I am a Kale. He extended his hand. Come, Draken. The air in here is stale. Draken took Lysander's hand, bringing it to his lips for a gentle, reverent kiss, a stark contrast to the violence he had just displayed. As you wish, my heart. What about us? Silas cried out as they turned to leave. Where do we go? We have nothing. Lysander stopped at the shattered doors. He didn't look back. I hear the outer zones are lovely this time of year, Lysander said. Perhaps you'll find a warm dumpster. The drive back to Draken's penthouse was silent, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows of the limousine. Lysander sat stiffly, his cane resting against his knees. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache in his chest. It was done. The vengeance he had dreamed of for 1,000 freezing nights was complete. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion. A warm, calloused hand covered his, prying his fingers away from the cane. You're trembling, Draken said softly. I'm not, Lysander lied. I can smell the distress on you, Ly. It tastes like bitter almonds. Draken slid across the leather seat, pulling Lysander into his lap. For a man of such terrifying power, Draken handled Lysander as if he were made of spun sugar. He wrapped his arms around the smaller man, burying his face in the crook of Lysander's neck, inhaling deeply. The Enigma's pheromones shifted from aggressive dominance to a soothing, heavy scent of rain and cedar, a biological blanket designed to calm a distressed mate. Lysander melted into the embrace, the tension leaking out of his spine. He reached up, tracing the sharp line of Draken's jaw with his fingertips. Did I go too far? Lysander whispered. You didn't go far enough, Draken rumbled against his skin. If you had let me, I would have burned the house down with them inside. That would be arson, Lysander murmured, a small smile playing on his lips. And we are respectable business owners now. Draken chuckled, a low vibration that Lysander felt in his own chest. We are whatever you want us to be. But tell me, was it worth it? Lysander thought about the look on his father's face, the terror in Cashin's eyes, the shattering of their perfect, glass world. No, Lysander admitted quietly. Their suffering didn't give me my sight back. It didn't undo the cold. He felt Draken stiffen, ready to offer violence to the world to fix it, But Lysander shook his head. He shifted, turning to face the heat of the man who had remade him. He ran his hands over Draken's shoulders, up his neck, tangling his fingers in the thick hair at the nape of his neck. But, Lysander whispered, it set me free. I don't have to look back anymore. I only have to look forward. And what do you see? Draken asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lysander didn't need eyes to see the man before him. He saw him in the heat of his skin, the scent of his soul, the steady, unyielding beat of his heart. I see you, Lysander said. I see home. Draken let out a ragged breath and captured Lysander's lips in a kiss that was desperate and consuming. It was a promise, a vow written not in ink but in blood and breath. The world outside could burn. The Valerius family could rot in the gutters they had once ruled. Here, in the dark, they were gods of their own making. The car slowed to a halt, but neither moved. Draken? Yes. You said you bought the house. I did. Burn it, Lysander whispered. Burn it to the ground. Draken smiled against his lips. With pleasure. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Lysander take control and Draken burn the world for him, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a family who abandoned you? Or would you leave them to the fate they designed for you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece. Best quality. High-res. 1.2. Korean manhwa style. Semi-realistic. Digital art. 2 men. BL. Yaoi. Man 1. Lysander, blindfolded with white silk cloth, scars on cheeks, wearing elegant fitted white suit, holding a black cane with silver handle, slender build, pale skin, expression of cold determination. Man 2. Draken, Enigma archetype, towering height, muscular build, wearing midnight blue velvet suit, glowing gold eyes, slit pupils, protective stance behind Man 1, hand. On Man 1's shoulder, dark aura radiating. Background is a grand ballroom, shattered glass on floor, cowering aristocrats in background, dramatic lighting, cinematic composition, sharp focus, intricate details.